Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories on the PS1. This one kind of threw me a little bit of a curveball. I kind of sort of know a little bit about Yu-Gi-Oh! But I wouldn't be who you'd call an expert. Back in the day, I watched like the first half of the first arc of the show, and I think I played Sacred Cards on the GBA, but I collected the absolute living crap out of those cards because I just thought the art on them was so cool. And the only place in town I could collect them was at this $1 store that had them in this little like $2 sticker vending machine. And I pumped so much money into that just to get cards, just because I thought they looked cool. Wow, I probably spent, honestly, hundreds of dollars worth of allowance money on those back in the day. But the key takeaway here is this is not a series that I'm really all that familiar with. I only collected the cards, I had no idea how to play, and to be fair, I don't think it's humanly possible to actually understand how to play a trading card game. Like, it just can't be done. And yet, I had to play this, and it led to some interesting experiences. Now the story, from what little I actually managed to get through this game, follows you, a nameable prince in Egypt, who's able to listen to this guy. Well, hey, you got a choice. You can listen to this guy or run away. Well, I'm a super nice guy, so I listen to my elders, and it promptly leads you to a fight where you cannot win. You then wake up, presumably hundreds of years later, as some other kid who's in a card game tournament, and after 3 rounds of the very first fight, I got completely curb stomped. Honestly, I thought this was a fight I had to lose as well. Turns out it wasn't, and I hadn't saved at that point and had to start over. And I promptly learned that every time you start over, you get completely different cards, which was a little bit strange. However, this time, for the sake of funds, I just ran away from the guy, figured it would skip all that dialogue, and well, now I'm at a map select screen, and I can fight more people. People that don't completely destroy me after 3 turns. Now don't get me wrong, I played this game for 2 hours straight at this point, and I had yet to win a single fight. I just kept losing over and over and over, and again, going back to the start, I had no idea how to play this game, and that leads me to, honestly, the biggest problem this game has. It doesn't tell you jack about how to play this game. But, fortunately, in between reloads, I found this fancy little option in the menu called Free Duel. And Free Duel is probably the closest to a proper tutorial you're gonna get, which is a pretty far cry from one, but still, it allows you to fight characters that you've beaten in the game, which at this point for me was 0, but still it had one default character, and I decided to start fighting him over and over because it's a consequence-free environment. But what's better? It's a consequence-free environment that only works one way. If you lose to these guys, no harm, no foul. If you beat these guys, you get one of their cards randomly added to your deck, and you could replace low-level cards with higher-level cards. So, while it wasn't exactly a decent tutorial, at the very least I could pad my character's stats a little bit by getting slightly better stuff while sussing out how exactly I'm supposed to play this thing. And here's where pretty much all of my gameplay came from in here. And because of how confusing I found this game to be, I'm gonna try and explain the rules as best I can. Bear with me on this. Alright, so to start, you get a deck of 40 cards. You can replace cards in your deck so long as it totals up to 40. Every time you win a fight, you get 1 card. Although it is randomized, you hope for ones that are better iterations of stuff that you have. Once you're in a proper duel, or card battle, you get a hand of 5 cards. Now, these cards primarily fall into 3 categories, and every turn you're allowed to put 1 card down. Now, those 3 categories are monsters, magic, and trap cards. Now, magic and trap cards get used sort of interchangeably. They take up the bottom half of your playable arena, put face down. And they sort of do the same thing from opposite ends of the spectrum. They work to equalize the playing field. Magic cards are things you have to activate to buff your team, or alternatively kind of equalize the battlefield a little bit. Trap cards are reactionary to your opponents attacking you, and they usually exist to either remove your opponent or debuff them. And the fact that they're used interchangeably and one is active and one's reactive means that you can actually use these to kind of play with your opponent a little bit. For example, you could put a magic card down, but since it's face down, your opponent isn't going to know that. And because they might think that you're putting down a trap card and it could react to them attacking you, they might play a little bit more defensively and strategically in order to sort of suss out a better plan as to how to defeat you, which could in turn give you the extra turn you need to win. And I think that is fundamentally actually a fantastic idea. It adds a lot of strategy and a lot of sort of head games to actually playing this, at least as a card game. Against a computer, it's not as effective, but still, it's conceptually a very brilliant idea. And likewise, monsters are quite similar. Now these are your foot soldiers, these are the guys who attack your opponent's team and your opponent directly, provided he has no teammates. There's a bunch of different types of monsters that are differentiated by like elements and types and stuff. I'll try and talk a little bit about that, but let's go back to the basics a little bit. When you take your monster, it has two values, an attack and a defense value. You can either put it face up or face down on your side of the field in either a horizontal or vertical stance. As far as I can tell, there's absolutely no reason to ever put it face up, because like magic or trap cards, it adds mystery to what you're doing, and it can be used to completely trick your opponents. Whereas if you put it face up, they know exactly what you've got and they'll just go gunning for it, provided it's advantageous for them to do so. However, if you put it face down, it's a mystery. So face up, there's not really a lot of reason to do this. Now if you put your cards vertically, that is in the attack position. This means that the only stat your monster has that matters is its attack value. And in attack position, it can attack opponents, or it can use its own attack value as a defense against opponents attacking it. However, if there's a difference between your opponents attacking you and how much attack you have favoring your opponents, the difference is taken away from your total HP for your deck or whatever. And when your HP that is initially 8,000 drops to 0, you lose. Now if you were to put your card in defense mode, any difference between your opponent's attack and your defense doesn't get taken out. But for most cards that I saw, the defense values were lower than their attack values, so you're kind of consigning them to definitely getting taken out, but not taking a direct loss from it. As well, if your attack values are the same in an attack position, both cards get taken out. However, if an attack is made on a defensive monster where its defense defeats the attack, nothing happens. And if an attacker loses in terms of attack against another attacker, then the one with the less HP loses. So even in attack positions, you gotta play defensively sometimes. And that actually adds a lot of depth to the cards. And that is the basics. But now we get into the more advanced stuff, and I felt I needed to talk about these last two factors separately, simply because at this point I had sunk about 6 hours into this game, and while I had learned at least some of the basics, this stuff I still haven't got figured out entirely. So the first thing you have to consider is the star sign. When you place down a card, it gives you a planet or a constellation or something, and it tells you to pick one or the other. Now what this is basically a rock, paper, scissors chart. And if your symbol is better than your opponent's, you get a boost to your attack. Whereas if theirs is better than yours, they get a boost to their attack, and it's a pretty significant boost, mind you. And while I'm able to figure that out, nowhere in the game does it seem to indicate what's good against what. And I mean, it probably wouldn't take too much to put a little indicator if you hovered your cursor over a card that says, okay, this is gonna take more damage from this, and it's gonna be better against that. You don't even have to put words there, you could just show the symbols and like a little green outline for positive and a red for negative or something. But nowhere in the game does it teach you this. And conversely, I mean, this game doesn't teach you anything about it, which is kind of a problem. But now we get to what I would argue is probably even more complex, and the reason why I lost so much. Fusions. And from what little I remember of the anime, they never even used these, so I'm not even sure if this is something exclusive to this game or not, but basically if two cards have interlocking properties, you can fuse them together. However, these properties are, like everything else in this game, not terribly well explained and kind of inconsistent from what I can tell. Now, the basics to understanding fusion is that the end resulting monster has to have lower points in its attack value than the two components. Okay, that's simple enough. However, then you have to realize that some fusions require exact singular specific cards to work, and other times it seems like it requires a subset of monster types. And this game's got a lot of monster types. It's got like plants, it's got dragons, it's got rocks, it's got bugs, it's got dinosaurs, it's got zombies, and you can fuse all these together provided they're actually compatible, but it's that compatibility that's really confusing. Because like the astral signs and everything else, there's no real indication as to what is going on in this game. Now, if I were in charge of developing this game, what I would do is allow the player to select one card they want as their principal monster to be fused, and then anything that was compatible with that, it would have like a little glow effect around it or something. Or, you know, another game that did something kind of like this with its combo system was a game called Legaia. And basically what you'd have to do is type in a bunch of different combos, and if you did something just right, you get a super combo. And while it was never listed initially, once you did it once, the game would remember your available combos as a shorthand to you. That would have made this so much easier. But having spent so much time sitting here trying to figure out my cards, I actually got pretty intimately familiar with them. I mean, at the same time, I'm not sure it's necessarily good that specifically I only really knew 3 fusions at heart by the end, which is Girl Monster plus Rock, Girl Monster plus Plant, and Dragon plus Zombie, except only some zombies work because other zombies just don't work, and if cards aren't compatible, oh, you get punished for it, because you discard the first card you put down, and then your second one ends face up in its attack position, meaning it's an easy kill, meaning you've just discarded 2 cards and taken a loss for it. I kind of get that they want to punish you for not understanding the systems, but they don't really teach you how to use it. And while I can definitely appreciate that it's trying to make me subconsciously learn about my cards better and more intimately, and that is absolutely brilliant, at least give me a starting base point for understanding what's happening to me. Like, seriously, the first fight that I had to actually win in the game, by round 2, they had already gotten like 2 fusions out on the field, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was completely lost, and I still hadn't gotten my head around even the basics of how to play this game. Now you're probably thinking, Fury, you have been here for, before I'm editing this, 17 minutes talking about how little this game tells you how to play it, how many hours you sunk into this, and I'm betting you were probably frustrated and hate this game right now. Well, no. I was having an absolute blast once I figured out how to use that free play mode and actually started trying to learn how to play. It's a great game, and like I mentioned when I was talking about the actual cards themselves, there's a lot of strategy and depth to this and head games involved. This is honestly kind of a brilliant strategy game and a brilliant card game, but it falls into that initial trap that every card game has, which is it's overly convoluted for its own good. And not teaching the player at all is such a problem with something like this that it makes it almost impossible to get into. But I'm kind of glad that I kept going, and you know, that it's my job to do this because it forced me to, but you know, I was having an absolute blast by the end of it. I had ended up sinking about 6 or 7 hours into this free mode against 2 enemies, just because I was too afraid to even go into the main story mode, just so I could get better cards and be more prepared. And honestly, I'm excited to keep playing this, because I was having an absolute blast. Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories. Before I played this game, I'd heard about it a bunch of times as one of those games on the PS1 that was like one of the best hidden gems, and while I'm not sure I'd give it that title ever, I think gameplay-wise it is absolutely brilliant. But it starts off not with a difficulty curve, but a solid wall that they make you run full speed into. And if you're not prepared to at least spend a little bit of time learning the basics, you're not going to get anywhere and you're just going to get frustrated. And that hurts this game quite a lot, because unless you're already a fan of the game itself, or at least the IP, you're going to be completely lost and you're probably going to give up like immediately. And that's a shame, because this is at its core a really brilliant and super fun game. I was excited to see every new card I got and how I could replace weaker iterations of basically the same card from my deck. There's so many cards in this, there's so many fusions, and while it's unbelievably inconsistent in how fusions really work, as well as really teaching you anything, it is an absolute blast to keep playing, and it feels like it's this giant pit of just content that you could get lost in. And I'm excited to keep playing this, honestly. I think I'm gonna make this one of my games I play on my off time, but while this game does start off really rough if you don't know what you're doing, if you can put in a couple hours to try and learn it, it will provide you with a lot of content, especially if you're interested in making the best team possible. And if you're not prepared to put in that time, well, there are guides online, but a lot of them really aren't super helpful from what I can tell. I went on 1 or 2 just to get some hints, and they didn't really tell me much. So you gotta be prepared to put in the time for this one, and speaking as an impatient person, it's definitely rewarding, but if you're not a patient person prepared for that, you're probably not going to enjoy this all that much. That said, if you are going to have a fantastic card game. Now, the overall presentation to Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories is quite impressive. In between fights, you have these nice hand-drawn animations, as well as some kind of weird pixely environments. Okay, it looks kind of dated, and the actual combat itself continues that trend. What is interesting about the presentation of combat, though, is there's like 2 modes to it, because if you attack your opponent using the X button, it's just 2 cards going at it. If you press the square button, for whatever reason, suddenly you go into like an actual RPG-style battle mode where you can actually see your monsters appear out of the cards and go at it. And while it changes absolutely nothing, the presentation shift definitely makes it look a lot more involving than just telling cards, this one has higher numbers than that one, so it wins, you know? Actually seeing the monsters come to life makes it totally awesome. Although I find it weird that one confirm button selects one mode and the other doesn't, as opposed to making that like a switchable thing, which is why it's very inconsistent in this footage. I apologize. Audio-wise, the soundtrack from what I heard in this game was pretty kick-ass. I really like the theme to the dinosaur guy that completely curb stomped me from the start. I really like the music in this game. It is a decent enough soundtrack. There is no voice acting in this game, which I find to be a little bit odd, especially for the time this game came out, but at the same time, you know, the rest of the presentation is pretty decent, and, you know, if that's not enough, you've got a really deep, impressive, brain-teasing and skill-testing card game at its core. Seriously, this game is pretty awesome by all regards. Now, if you want a copy of Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories on the PS1, the cheapest copy I'm seeing right now is about $25, and kind of like I said at the start, if you're not willing to put in the time to actually learn this game, that's going to be a lot of money for very little payoff. If you are willing to put in the time, or you already at least have an idea as to how to play this, that is totally a good deal for this, because this game just has so much content just in terms of sheer cards that you can customize your deck with. And I mean, I've heard you can even take real cards, punch in codes from them, and get them in-game. And that's kind of like external DLC for those who actually collected the cards. I wish I still had mine to test it out, but I gave mine away a while ago to someone who I think really appreciated them. And I gotta say, thank you to the person who remains anonymous who sent this to the show, along with Pokemon Snap and a PS1 memory card so that, you know, I can actually play this, because I didn't have one of those before. I gotta say, Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, I'm not a big card guy, I'm not the most familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! Even though I did spend a metric crap ton of money on the cards back in the day, and I've never had the biggest interest in the anime except for the abridged series, but I like this game a lot. It has an absolute brick wall of a learning curve from the start if you don't know anything about this series, but if you take the time to learn, you've got a really wildly deep card game that has a lot of strategic depth to it, and a lot of nuance. And, you know, if you like card games, this is absolutely going to be down your alley. And I can say that because I really don't care for card games that much, but I had an absolute blast playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories. And I can't wait to get back into playing this and, you know, probably try and actually go through the story mode once I'm actually brave enough to fight Dinosaur Guy and not get completely stomped again. But seriously, like I said, I've seen this on so many sort of like hidden gem videos for this console, and I gotta agree, it's a great game. Maybe not one of my favorites of all time, but I gotta say, this game, it surprised me in the pleasantest way possible. For someone who doesn't really like card games at all, and like I said, I don't think it's humanly possible to understand how to play these, because I find them to be overly convoluted, you know what? This one almost completely changes my mind about it. Almost.